Greetings all. Even though the title of this talk is Radical Herbalism during Genocide, there's a content warning that anything to do with colonialism will always be distressing. How, as a herbalist, I would love to be talking about herbs today, but it's just not possible within the context of everything that's happening. Today is 251 days of genocide, well over 40,000 people killed, 15,000 children onto the rubble, 79,000 tons of explosives dropped. Today is 7 years since the Grenfell tragedy, where resident safety concerns were ignored and the resultant horrific inferno was live streamed was completely preventable. Rest in peace to the 72 or more who were murdered. Condolences to their beloved and the community. Walid Daka from Baka Gardbiye was one of the longest incarcerated political prisoners in Israel. He was imprisoned for 38 years. During this period, he got married in 1999, smuggled his sperm out as he was not allowed to attend conjugal visits, and Milad was born in 2020. He had a bachelor's degree and master's in political science, but never completed his doctorate. He wrote a children's book on the magical use of olive oil. Walid Daka died in 2001 from a rare bone cancer. Even on his deathbed, the Israeli authorities continued to display chilling levels of cruelty against Walid and his family, not only denying him adequate medical care and food, but also preventing him from saying a final goodbye to his wife Sana, Salome, and their 4-year-old Milad. Kelso Cochran was a 23-year-old Antiguan man who was a skilled carpenter. He was stabbed by racist teddy boys around the corner from here on the 17th of May 1959. No one was ever held accountable for his death, and there was a police cover-up, and his family is still campaigning for justice today. 12,000 people attended his funeral. This is a picture of Claudia Jones and my dad speaking at the funeral of Kelso Cochran. Claudia Jones, in response, started the first indoor carnival in St Pancras Town Hall, and she said, "A people's art is the genesis of their freedom."
Herbalism uses herbal medicine to support health and well-being. Herbal medicine is one of many offshoots of traditional and integrative medicinal practices. To decolonize herbal medicine is to not see herbal medicine as a solo discipline. It is one aspect of culture where practitioners are apprenticed or trained in the art of plant connection and human connection via oral tradition and keen observation and practice. This has occurred over millennia, and it works. It traditionally exists with many other disciplines such as massage, song, dance, incantation, culture, and food, etc. It is not based on the individual. It existed in this island and was extinguished by land removal, feudal oppressive hierarchies, and class systems.
Energetics, soul nourishment, intentional care, and love are key features missing from many Western interpretations of herbal medicine and science. Then, in an attempt to seek soul nourishment, cultural appropriation becomes rife. Healing must involve families, communities, and societies. We cannot heal in isolation. It is important not to view herbal medicine as a binary opposite of modern scientific medicine, although there is a myth that science is not biased. It is steeped in colonial violence. Examples such as the Tuskegee crime, when between 1932 and 1972, 600 black men, descendants of people forcibly enslaved to Turtle Island from Africa, were deliberately infected, 201, deliberately untreated, 399, with syphilis, to watch the course of the disease on humans without informed consent.
Hi, I'm honoured to be standing here because I was invited by my friend Claudia, who is a radical herbalist, standing holding red carnations, as the red carnation signifies the blood of innocent fallen victims. These are victims of revolutionary martyrs or people who have been subject to genocide. So the red carnation is very significant. It represents blood. A 2007 PLO report discussed more than 1,000 political prisoners, including children, being used for medical experimentation. In 2005, a medical ethicist described forced experiments in Israeli hospitals on children and elders with dementia. Holocaust survivors who were given the worst housing and are severely discriminated for were subjected to experimental drugs. There is nothing more anti-Semitic than Zionism. In the 1700s, colonial voyages and expeditions to seek new life, which would become specimens to be owned, extracted and abused under the guise of serving a moral purpose of improving human life. I tell you and ask you, whose lives?
Hans Sloane, who Sloane Square is named after, and collection was the genesis of the British Natural History Museum, listed several such items in his catalogue of miscellaneous things, such as spoons made of calabashes used by enslaved people, whips to beat them, nooses for executing rebels, and clothing and weapons employed by the Maroons, and skin, like skin in banks or hanging off decapitated babies. Economic botany laid the way for notions of entitlement of others' homelands and Zionist botany. In 1986, the IDF Medical Corps and Israeli Military of Health founded the largest skin bank, and in 2009, Israel admitted to organ, cornea, heart valves and skin theft after claims of guidelines were not clear.
For the first time, Israel has admitted body parts from the dead were taken without permission from relatives.
Thousands of Ethiopian women were given Depo-Provera and implant contraception without consent. Black babies are 3 times more likely to die in the UK and 4 times more likely to die in Turtle Island than white people.
Recently in the UK, the Langstaff School report cited in the Infected Blood Inquiry describes how children treated with infected blood products were the objects of research, while the risks of infection were ignored. Only 30 of the 122 students who attended the school are alive. This point relates to lack of concern for marginalised citizens by governments, which permeates to the same governments giving zero regard for global citizens, as a resultant lack of trust for marginalised people in medical services. The same governments invest in military domination and deliberate destabilisation to access to coltan, cobalt and other resources. There is a two-way arms trade, so both sells and supplies to Israel and vice versa. Plastics from Israel are one of the biggest imports to the UK. Palantir is an American software company that was awarded a £330 million contract by the NHS last year to create a new data system, the Federated Data Platform, FDP, supply AI military tech to the Israeli army. Concerns have been raised about how patient data will be used, as well as Palantir's strategic partnership with the Israeli Defense Forces.
Indigenous people protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. Israel is responsible for oppressive regimes and subjugation of indigenous people globally. Israel trains the Pegasus program to surveil indigenous people on the colonial border of Mexico. It provides 70% of Azerbaijan's weapons to mass murder Armenians. It provides technology and weapons to oversee Mapuche people. They supported the 1976 occupation of Argentina, where over 30,000 people were killed, the 1982 coup and genocide in Guatemala. They have supported conflicts in Nicaragua and El Salvador. They provide Brazilian military police technology and training. Israel sold military technology and trained troops in genocide in Sri Lanka. India is one of the biggest suppliers of Israeli weaponry and facilitate war crimes in Kashmir. The Philippines buys tanks, guns, missiles from Israeli companies and abstained for voting for a ceasefire, and so on and so on.
Herbs cannot grow during ecocide. Water is the first medicine. The Garma Declaration in 2008. Many indigenous people from around the world declared that water is a living entity with a distinct spiritual dimension. Water is life. We are 70% water, our cells are 70% water, our brains are 80% water. The earth is 70% water. Water is life. It carries memory, molecular forms, and it communicates. We humans must not shit in water, but into the soil. Israel uses water abuse as a weapon of mass destruction. Israel has grabbed water by diverted pipes from underwater sources, prevented access to surface water from the Jordan Valley since 1967, poisoned wells, poured sewage outlets onto crops full of E. coli, dumping chemicals into water, diverted pipes under villages into illegal settlements, bombed pumping centres and desalination plants which serve 1.1 million people. This is part of the environmental Nakba, which we will describe later. Water infrastructure has not been prioritised in the city of Atlanta in the past few weeks, as we've seen in the past few weeks. The indigenous homeland of the Muskogee and Cherokee people. Yet, $250 million and $250,000 respectively have been allocated to the Atlanta Police and the Police Federation, and 21 million for only 21 million for services maintenance. The Georgia International Law Enforcement Agency sends police to Israel to train.
Many of the herbs used in the so-called Western herbal materia medica are legacies from botanical loot stolen from across the globe. During early colonization, the trend was to identify profitable plants via theft of indigenous knowledge, then move the plant elsewhere to be grown by a different group of indigenous people, also forcibly removed from their land. Examples include breadfruit, tea, cocoa, and cinchona. Separating people from their family and culture under exploitation. Then, years later, humans are relocated speaking the colonizers' language and are told about our medicine by scientists like turmeric. Haldi is great with black pepper, kali mirch, and fat, ghee, just like we've made it all along. Colonial sites where study on potentially extractable plants, also known as specimens, were founded on the knowledge and guidance of enslaved people, whose names and experience are erased. In Jamaica, there is a direct relationship between geological exploration and plantation systems. Colonizers introduced species such as mongoose to eat rats on the ships, but in Jamaica they also eat lizards, snakes, insects, birds, and eggs.
Banu Subramaniam questions whether botany is a colonial ethnoscience, removing the subject from the context. We will briefly describe Zionist botany shortly. Plants are often described like migrant humans, invasive and problematic. Conversely, herbalists call plants allies, which has a subtext that they are there for humans in human extraction, often in non-reciprocal relationship. I think of plants as innocent bystanders. What as humans can we give to the earth?
Many Palestinians have an intimate relationship to their homeland, growing their own food and tending to ancient olive groves for generations. Olive trees can live for thousands of years. Many herbalists in the UK separate politics from herbal medicine. They say herbal medicine is not political, but claim to be holistic. They emulate the medical model, which identifies the patient as the source of a problem, not the surrounding stressors and historical and ongoing trauma. Spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity describes a self-serving agenda of avoiding gross discomfort through diversion, distraction, disconnection, and sometimes blame. Akin to psychiatry, it pathologizes anger, distress, trauma responses, and resistance. Zora Neale Hurston said, "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it." There are loads of famous quotes for silence and neutrality during situations of injustice equating to complicity. I often read phrases such as, "We are all one," "I am on the side of peace," "May all beings be free from suffering." Herbalists and New Age proclamations of peace and love, but nothing of justice, land back, appropriation, and reparations. Drapetomania was a diagnosis given to enslaved Africans who dared resist violence and oppression. Israeli leadership used Palestinian opposition to the Balfour Declaration and occupation to revise history, which has now become ingrained in mainstream narrative on Palestine. People who were murdered by the police here, specifically black men, and in the UK, are said to have bizarre super strength called excited delirium that justifies their extermination. Herbalists can also take the subject from the context. They often separate living beings from their reality and oppression. They say herbal medicine is not political while hosting so-called cacao ceremonies or using global, endangered, and unethically extracted herbs like frankincense and stolen knowledge. Israel has invested heavily into researching herbal medicines and have even germinated extinct plant species that have been extinct for over 1,000 years. They carry out colonial expeditions for medical research. Appropriation is a huge issue in herbal medicine, similarly to how Israelis claim hummus, language, cloth, and land. Much of early Zionist propaganda referred to Palestinians as having no culture. The renaming of people, plants, and places, stealing names, and name erasure are all hallmarks of colonialism. Making up shit are also hallmarks of colonialism. Terra Nullius is one example. Hence why using names for like Turtle Island for America, Aotearoa for New Zealand, and Kanaki for New Caledonia is important. Free, free Kanaki. Kanaki has nickel.
Free, free Kanaki!
Calling kiwi fruit kiwis when they are Chinese gooseberries. Netanyahu's real name is Ben-Zion Milyakowski. Jerusalem is Al-Quds. Radical herbalism attempts to acknowledge the external causes for dysregulation, depression, and illness. Hopefully, radical herbalists work within communities to support nourishment, healing, land protection, promote the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, and resist all levels of oppression everywhere. If you buy Dead Sea salts, ensure they are from the Jordanian side of the sea, for example. This is work herbalists in the UK need to do more on. In the London context that I know of, herbalists tend to consult with individuals about their medical history, family history, lifestyles, diet, sleep, stress load, then encourage healing promoting suggestions, and probably prescribe herbal medicines, which are usually several herbs mixed together as teas, decoctions, powders, tinctures, and balms. However, no one can heal in isolation. Private practice is inevitably elitist and classist.
Community herbalists may be involved with community growing projects, medicine making projects, and apothecaries, mutual aid, provide herbal first aid in precarious situations, including protests and activism events, or attend teach outs. The modus operandi is solidarity and care, not profit. There is a saying, as on earth, so in the body. As above, so below. This relates to numerous symbolic patterns. As the celestial bodies whirl and pulsate on their trajectories, they are in rhythm with the tides of the shores, the tides of our bodies and breath. Herbs are fantastic for providing building block chemicals for hormones, defense chemicals, to soothe nerves, etc. But the plants also impart a spirit essence, which is very interconnected to the way the herb was raised from seed to harvest to preparation. The art of biodynamics and alchemical medicine making affects the human and animal body in subtle but profound ways.
Whilst anti-Semitic violence and pogroms existed, the notion of European entitlement to explore, land grab, and extract derived largely from economic botany. Zionism was being designed in the 1880s and often used the work of botanists to justify occupation and myths. Botanischer Zionismus refers to a group led by the German colonial botanist Otto Warburg, not to be confused with the Otto Warburg who described cancer cells preferentially taking up glucose and using lactate metabolism. The term botany is what beef is to cow. Botany separates the living from their context, historical context, kinship relationships, and culture, particularly indigenous cooperation methods, aka sustainability, which is actually a colonial term, because in and of itself, indigenous people don't need to call something sustainable because we already practice it by nature. In the early 1900s, Zionist botanists set to transform Palestine into a European green using colonial myths. The first is terra nullius, which means a no man's land, indicating that nobody was there, supposedly. And the second is that the native savage cannot self-manage and needs saving, or to be saved. Indigenous people protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. The term terra nullius refers to a no man's land. It was used in Australia and in Western Sahara and has legal significance under international law, implying that the law does not belong to state and that no sovereignty has been assigned to it. Sovereignty. When Captain James Cook and Joseph Banks arrived in Karmay, which they renamed Botany Bay, they mocked indigenous people for not using the land fully, when in fact the spaces in the land were intentional to protect from bushfires. Botanical Zionists regarded Palestine as a sparsely populated, arid, infertile land. In fact, Ramallah gets more rainfall than Paris. Geologically, Palestine is part of the Fertile Crescent, with aquifers and groundwater. There is desert too, of course. William Eugene Blackstone used the term, a land without people for a people without a land. By the way, in 1903, the Jewish Territorial Organization were eyeing up Patagonia and Uganda for Zionist territories. Israeli scientific papers, titles such as Making the Desert Bloom and the Possibility of a Productive Palestine, exist.
Intifada revolution! Intifada revolution!
In 1937, Alexander Ike, a Zionist botanist, was invited to testify before the Peel Commission to identify whether Palestine could sustain a large population. He was asked to prepare a map for the international arena. Aaron Aronson, another Zionist botanist, was consulted on the northern boundary of Palestine. He envisaged that this border would include the sources of the Jordan, Litani, and Yarmouk River to ensure adequate irrigation for the new Israel. Greenwashing refers to making misleading statements about environmental benefit. Israel uses greenwashing to deflect from human rights abuse and earth-water abuse. Israel has one of the highest carbon footprints per capita and thus is a major contributor to climate change. It was estimated that in the first 2 months of the current bombardment of Gaza and ground invasion, there is greater than the annual carbon footprint of more than 20 of the world's most climate vulnerable nations. Venezuela has just announced with great sadness that it is the first Andean countries to lose all of their glaciers. Israel has used greenwashing to make out that they are protecting plant species. In 2005, they put akub, a thistle cardoon delicacy, on the protected species life and banned its collection by the Palestinian people. Akub tastes a bit like artichoke and asparagus. It's a tonic to the kidneys and liver and good for hypoglycemics. The akub cream heals second-degree burns. In 2014, a Palestinian boy was shot and murdered, crossing the apartheid wall simply to pick the akub herb plant. A third of species in occupied land are endangered due to urbanization. The use of toxic pesticides harms the waters and birds have also become endangered. Za'atar is also banned where people have been fined and imprisoned for harvesting. There's a film by Jumana Manna called The Foragers, which documents this.
There is no such thing as a single issue struggle. Touch one, touch all. Not just another human, but all life. Water is life, we must not shit into it. What harms Palestinians harms all. What harms Congolese harms all. What harms Sudanese harms all. Free Kanaki, free Haiti, free children, free babies, free trees, free water. Stop killing babies and their parents. Stop this Holocaust. Stop killing the land. Stop. I hope soon the marches for Palestine will join with the marches for African people in Congo, Sudan, Haiti, Kanaki, West Papua, Kashmir, and fill the cities and shut down capitalism. I hope that these murals for Palestine will join the global intersections of oppression. I hope one day that murals will be a cause of celebration, not tragedy. Humans cannot heal in isolation. We must heal the soul destruction that we see when we watch babies with their heads blown off on the phone, or the soul destruction that allows someone to actually kill that baby. Humans have to imagine liberatory, safe ways of being centered on care, empathy, and flexibility. Liberation, justice and reparation for Grenfell and all precarious living situations. Free Palestine.